So I gave a similar talk last year, and it seemed to go down quite well, so I was asked to repeat it. What I'm going to do is describe how Google Ad Grants and Analytics can help you achieve your organization's objectives. What I'm going to say is based on 5 to 6 years of experience working with charities who have Google Ad Grants, managing ad grants on their behalf, helping them with their analytics setup, helping them define what their organizational goals are on the web, and then try to track them. A lot of this stuff is also in the best practice guide, which has the survey results from the survey we did of 115 charities at the beginning of this year, a lot of them on the ECF list. And we wanted to find out more about how charities are using their Google Ad Grant and kind of help us understand how we can really help the sector. Because I understand not all of them are going to be clients of ours, but we have knowledge that we're willing to share because that's the sort of thing we do. My name's Chris Whalen. I kind of started off working at Torchbox as a project manager, but I found my niche after a couple of years working in search marketing. So project management wasn't really for me. I prefer doing the work rather than watching other people do the work. And I really like the data side of it. Like, I always liked stats at school. I like kind of neatness. I like accuracy. I like controlling messaging, of paring down language. And I like that you can approach marketing and Google Ad Grants specifically as a whole journey, not just getting the click, but tracking what happens after the click and seeing how that translates into value for the organization. So if I start working with an organization or a charity, one of the first conversations I'll have is to try and understand what their mission is as an organization and how those organizational objectives translate to the web. So for a think tank, it might be downloading publications, it might be attending paid events. For a fundraising charity, it might be making donations, signing up to an email list, supporting campaigns. And you'd be surprised how many organizations don't actually track those actions on their website. I feel quite sad when I look at an organization's analytics account and they're not tracking any goals. I don't really know where to start sometimes. It's just like, why are you not doing this thing? So that's one of the first conversations I have. I want to kind of understand what they want to achieve from the advertising, how they're going to track it, and whether they need to do some analytics work in order to get there. So you get your organizational objectives, you translate them into key performance indicators or KPIs, and then you translate those KPIs into trackable analytics goals. So as I mentioned, PDF downloads, donations. It could even just be a level of engagement. You know, have they viewed more than 3 pages? Have they just not been a bounce visitor? So we often start with Google Ad Grants. That seems to be the skill that we have that charities need. And it's a relatively low cost and low commitment. But it's a good way for us to build an understanding of what an organization is about, because we immerse ourselves into the website. We have to understand what the content's about. We have to sometimes translate the language that the organization uses internally into language that users are going to be searching for on search engines. So I'm now going to go through a kind of range of best practices. There are not going to be that many screenshots of the AdWords interface. I'm going to assume you have a certain level of knowledge and understanding about some of the terminology I'm using, but if you don't, feel free to stick your hand up, interrupt me, and I can explain more if you need more detail. So I'm going to kind of go through these examples, and then maybe at the end, you can come to me with some problems that you've got or some ideas or things that are stimulated as I'm talking. So yeah, that's how it's going to go. So having had that first conversation about what organizational objectives are and how you're going to track them, one of the first things I look at when I inherit an AdWords account or set one up is whether or not AdWords is linked to Google Analytics. And this is the really important step, because you want to be able to get rich AdWords data in Google Analytics to help you optimize your campaigns, to help you identify that that traffic came from AdWords in the first place. I'm not going to explain how to do that. There's loads of decent help documentation by Google themselves. But basically, you have to use the same login on both accounts and have admin privileges. You need to link the account within analytics, and then you need to enable auto tagging, as it's called. So in the old days of AdWords, before I started working with it, you used to have to manually tag all your URLs with campaign, source medium, keywords, parameters. That's now done automatically using auto tagging. And that's the kind of parameter string you sometimes see tagged onto the end of a URL. It's about 20 odd characters. When you click on an ad, that's the translation of the source and campaign data into analytics. You can also link back the other way and send analytics data into AdWords, so that when you're optimizing your campaigns within the AdWords interface, you can see metrics such as bounce rate, pages per session, average visit duration, so that you can start to optimize your campaigns for quality as well as the conversions you're trying to get. So I recommend linking the accounts both ways. One of the things you can do when you link analytics to AdWords is to import the goals that you have in analytics. So it could be a donation, it could be a PDF download. You can then import those into AdWords, and they're called conversions within AdWords. And that means that you can optimize your ads in order to get higher conversion rate, in order to get a higher number of conversions. So it's really important to have that kind of quality metric alongside the kind of bounce rate metric, so you can start to optimize for the action that you actually want to achieve on your website. And I always recommend, if you are going to be running an AdWords campaign, don't do it blind. So always have at least one goal you want to track. Even if there is no kind of tangible goal, there is a relatively new feature of Google Analytics called a SMART goal. So that's a machine learning tool which identifies the best 5% of your traffic in terms of engagement. So low bounce rate, high number of pages per session, high number of high time on site. And those visits are the ones that are most likely to convert. So even if you're not actually tracking that conversion, Google has a machine learning tool that will identify like your most engaged visitors. And this SMART goal, you can import that into from analytics into AdWords, and it will help you kind of optimize for quality. So I recommend looking into that if you're not already tracking conversions. It's just a quick first step. Another reason to track at least one conversion goal is that that's one of the eligibility criteria for upgrading from $10,000 a month to $40,000 a month with Google Ad Grants. So you have to be tracking conversions, and it has to be some kind of tangible thing. It can't just be you've visited a blog page. It needs to be an actual useful action. Another best practice is to set all of your keyword bids to $2. So that's the maximum you can bid in an AdWords campaign for Google Analytics. It used to be $1 a couple of years ago, but they did increase it. And the reason I recommend setting it to that maximum is so that you can compete with paying advertisers more readily, and so that you can spend as much of your budget as possible. Often the objective for me managing an account is to get from the basic $10,000 up to $40,000 as quickly as possible. So you kind of want to spend the money as much as possible. So that's one reason to raise your bids to $2. And you can do that at the ad group level. So you set a default bid, and then all your keywords inherit that default bid. So I recommend set it $2 until you're at Grants Pro, when you can start to play around with it and lower your bids. One of the challenges of qualifying for Grants Pro is making sure you're actually spending up to and including $330 a day, which is the maximum you can spend per day. So it's not $10,000 is the maximum you can spend per day. It's actually split down into $330 maximum. So if you don't spend that $330 in one day, you can't roll that over to the next day. And one way to kind of mitigate that is to create a shared budget. So usually you set the budget at the campaign level. So you might have 10 campaigns, and they would each have a campaign budget. And once they hit that budget limit, they would stop spending for that day. So the beauty of a shared budget is you basically put all the campaigns into the same budget pool. And it means that whichever campaign has the demand, you know, there might be a spike in searches for the general election around May last year. That campaign would take up most of the budget. So having a shared budget means you don't have to constantly be checking and adjusting the budgets based on the demand. You can just let the campaign or let the account kind of manage itself. And that's a relatively new feature. It's only been around for 2 or 3 years, but we found that accounts that we manage with a shared budget, they max out the spend much more easily. And if that's your objective to get up to Grants Pro, that's a really good way to do it. Another good tip, which I discovered quite early on, is to create an automated rule so that the account optimizes itself. So one of the benchmarks of good performance in AdWords is having a click-through rate of 1%. And that means out of every 100 times your ad is displayed, one user clicks on it. So it's kind of weird to be involved in a discipline where you can fail 99 times out of 100 and call yourself successful. But that's true for AdWords. So you could do this manually. You could regularly sort through your account, find keywords with a low click-through rate, and pause or delete them. But I like to create this automated rule that runs every night at 11 o'clock, uses all-time data, and it finds keywords with more than 200 impressions, but less than 1% click-through rate, and it will pause them automatically. And then as I'm doing my kind of regular housekeeping, I will review those paused keywords and decide what I want to do with them. Usually I'll delete them, but sometimes I'll look at the search terms they've generated and see if there are any keywords I can pick out as an exact match keyword and run that might be related to that original keyword. The reason it's 200 impressions is you want enough data to base your decision on. You don't want to base it on less than 200 impressions because it might be a statistical anomaly, and 200 impressions is the kind of recommended number where you actually get a kind of true result. Like that keyword is not going to get much better if it's got a low click-through rate and you've had 200 impressions already. You could be a bit more generous and extend it to 1,000 or to 30 days worth of activity, but the 200 impressions seems to work for me. It's a bit like with a Facebook post. You can tell within the first 5 to 10 minutes whether it's going to take off or not based on the number of clicks it gets in that early period. It's a kind of similar idea with a keyword, whether or not it's going to perform well. Another way to grow your account is to build a campaign for each of your organization's keyword territories. And the way that I do this when I'm working with an organization that I don't know that well is I go through their website systematically and use their navigation to kind of understand the different keyword territories that they cover. So the different campaigns they're involved in, the different research topics, and I make sure there's a campaign built for each of those. I use the language of the website as the starting point, plug the keywords into the keyword planner, and see the variations that come up. So that's a really easy way to kind of grow an account. As I'm building those campaigns, a really good best practice is to create tightly themed ad groups. So an account is structured with multiple campaigns, and then within each campaign you have ad groups. And it's at the ad group level that you sort your keywords into related topics, and you create your ads for a particular set of keywords. And the reason it's good practice to structure your account this way is because it makes your ads more targeted, because the search term that the user is searching for is going to be reflected in the ad copy, so it makes your ad more relevant. The text that matches will be highlighted in bold, and it'll make your ad stand out. And that, in turn, improves the click-through rate of your ad. It will improve your quality score because it's more relevant and because your click-through rate is higher. And as a result, you actually end up paying less for those clicks. So it's within your interest to structure your account well. Another tool that I use every day is AdWords Editor. So with AdWords, you can manage it completely through the web interface. But if you're doing bulk changes in an account, I find it much easier to do that offline in AdWords Editor. There are bulk editing tools on the web interface, but I find it actually easier to do it in AdWords Editor. So for example, if I've got an evergreen campaign for a health think tank, and they're going to be talking about public health, I might have created that campaign 2 or 3 years ago, and the keywords are still relevant, and my ad groups are nicely structured, but they've got a new publication out. I want to be able to write ads for that quite quickly and launch it on the same day that the publication comes out. So you can do that in AdWords Editor. You can create 2 or 3 template ads, copy them into each of the ad groups, tweak the headline, tweak the display URL, change the landing page, and then launch it. So I can sometimes get things live within an hour or 2 of the publication going out. And you can even do that preparation ahead of time so that you can, as soon as it's live, you can launch your campaign. AdWords Editor is also really good for doing some basic kind of pruning of your ads. So one of the things I recommend is to have 3 ads per ad group so that they're always competing against each other. And it means that if there's a bad thing about your ad copy that's not resonating with people, then that's not going to get all of the impressions. And one of the things I do as I'm optimizing an account is to go through each ad group in turn, look at the worst performing ad, delete that, look at the best performing ad, create a copy of it, and change maybe the call to action, change the headline, change the description in some way. And AdWords Editor makes that kind of much easier to do because you can just copy and paste things a lot more easily. And you can do kind of find and replace. It's kind of like any word processing software. There are the same sort of editing functions you can do, so you're not always typing everything by hand all the time. Another benefit of AdWords Editor is that it has a tool to help you identify and remove duplicate keywords. One of the reasons you want to avoid duplicate keywords in AdWords is so that you have more control over which ads show for which searches. It means your keywords would also be competing against each other, so you may end up paying more, or it's not optimal to have the same keyword in multiple campaigns or ad groups. So you can run a check in AdWords Editor and it will show you a list of all the duplicate keywords, and then you can then decide, I'm going to run this keyword in this campaign because that's higher priority. Or you can look at some performance metrics and realize, actually the conversion rate for this keyword is better in this campaign, so I'm going to pause or delete the other version. So that is all much easier within AdWords Editor. And it's also got smarter, over the last year or so, it can now tell that it's the same keyword even if the capitalization in the keyword isn't the same. It used to be, it would have to be the same letter case. And now it can tell, if you've maybe capitalized NHS, it will tell it's the same keyword even if you've written it lowercase elsewhere. I mentioned this earlier, writing 3 ads per ad group. And I watched a kind of Google presentation on optimization a couple of weeks ago, specifically for Google Ad Grants. And they had a statistic about kind of backing up this theory of writing 3 ads per ad group. And it does actually improve your click-through rate because there's always going to be a better version of your ad that you could write. So if you're writing more versions of it, you're more likely to get close to that kind of perfect ad. It does also mean you can kind of experiment with different landing pages or different calls to action, different messaging. Sometimes you want the messaging to be exactly the same as on the landing page. Sometimes you want to use the language that the user is searching for. And 3 ads seems to be the optimal number. You can have somewhere between 2 and 4, but for me, 3 is the magic number. When I first started working with AdWords, I was using a lot of broad match keywords, and that's the default option. So broad match keywords kind of capture the most amount of traffic, but it also captures the most amount of kind of irrelevant traffic. A few years ago, they released broad match modifier, which is when you place a plus symbol in front of every word in the keyword that you want to be in the user's search query. It's a little bit like a guest list in a club. You're kind of putting a little plus next to all the words. And if they're not on that list, then your ad is not going to show for the user's search. The benefit of broad match modify is it excludes more irrelevant traffic, so you don't have to add as many negative keywords. It's also a bit more flexible than phrase match because the words can appear in any order. So it picks up much more long tail variations, which is where a lot of the volume can be. And alongside the broad match modifier, I also use a lot of exact match keywords, and those are the kind of higher volume terms where what the user's searching for has to exactly match the keyword. And a lot of my exact match keywords actually come from the data that AdWords gives you. So they do come from the keyword planner, but also you can look at your search terms report and see what users were actually typing when they clicked on your ad. And you'll see trends of kind of high volume terms that would be a good candidate for an exact match keyword. And the beauty of those is you can write really targeted ads, so you can use exactly the same phrase, exactly the same keyword within the ad copy, so it makes your ads look relevant and it improves the performance. Another best practice which is sometimes neglected is adding negative keywords. And this is the simplest way to improve your click-through rates, make your ads relevant, and just stop wasting budget. Because essentially every time someone clicks on your ad but then bounces straight off the page without performing the action, you're wasting, $1 to $1.50 of, virtual money. So it makes sense to kind of exclude the irrelevant traffic, and that can sometimes happen when the keyword you're using is a bit vague. So in one of my accounts that I inherited, they had the broad match keyword internet, just internet on its own. And you can imagine how many things that matches with. Some of it not safe for work, some of it about working from home, on a kind of those weird internet work from home, self-finance yourself kind of jobs. So you kind of want to avoid the irrelevant traffic you get from those sorts of keywords. Sometimes they can be good because it generates extra ideas, but a lot of the times it's irrelevant traffic and you want to kind of get rid of it. So negative keywords are the way to go. As I mentioned, the search term report is a really good source of negative keyword ideas. So you can see the performance of a keyword, see that it's not performing well, see that it's not relevant to the content you've got on your landing page, and exclude it. You can also use the keyword planner, so when you're building your campaign, some of Google's suggestions are not accurate, they're not relevant, and that's because it's a kind of machine learning thing, and it doesn't always understand the language that you're using, so that can be a good source of keyword ideas. If you spot an irrelevant one as you're building a campaign, add it to your negative keyword list straight away. You can also just perform searches on Google and look at the related searches you see below the results. And sometimes you'll see a longer tail variation of the keyword that's not relevant. Add that to your negative keyword list as well. Another tool is Google Trends, which is good for kind of gauging the relative importance or kind of volume of certain keywords, but it also has, if you download the data into a CSV file, it will give you a list of kind of related terms for the same keyword. That can be another good source of negatives. And finally, Google has this opportunities tab within AdWords, which looks at the data and the keywords already in your account and then makes suggestions of keywords you might want to add. And this is really kind of aimed at paying advertisers. It's basically trying to make you spend or waste money on more keywords. And a lot of the suggestions aren't relevant, so again, you can use those as a source of negative keywords. One of the things that can really help your ads stand out on a search result page is to use ad extensions. So these are additional pieces of text or kind of metadata that you can display alongside your ad. And the most common one is site links. So you see this in organic results, often for a brand search. You'll see the main home page, but then below that there'll be somewhere between 2 to 6 additional pages listed. And in organic search, you can't control those. You can't control the text of them. All you can do is disable them in Google Search Console. On the other hand, in Google AdWords, you've got full control over the site links that would be displayed below an ad. And they're really good because they allow you to have a secondary call to action. They allow you to have more than one landing page. So you might have a publication that's coming out, but then also have a supporting blog post that you want to publicize. And I will often put a link to the blog post in the site links just to show to the user that there's more information available on the same subject. You can also use it to kind of send people to, an index page for the same subject or an event. And it's a way to kind of satisfy the different silos within an organization and let them know that their thing, their event, their publication is also getting the same level of exposure as the kind of top priority item. Alongside site links, which are clickable links that you can specify, there are call-out extensions. And these are plain text that appear below the ad copy. And the beauty of them is it allows you to have a kind of extended ad copy. So you are restricted to 25 characters in the headline and 35 characters in each of the 2 lines of description. The call-out extensions give you an extra 4 times 25 characters, so you can have extra calls to action. You can have kind of phrases that describe more about the thing you're advertising. And it's just a great way to kind of take up more real estate and help your ad stand out. Similar to call-out extensions, which are just plain text, they're not links, are structured snippets. So that's similar to call-out extensions, but a list instead. So if you have a venue hire as part of your organization's building, you could list the different kinds of room that you have available. So you might have a lecture theatre, you might have a meeting room, you might have a conference room, you might have a room for wedding receptions, and you can kind of list those different items underneath your ad. If you have a kind of hotline or a donation number, you can have that as a call extension. So as well as seeing the ad copy, you'll see your organization's phone number. And there's different ways to manage this. You can either have your actual phone number, in which case the tracking on that is quite limited, but you can also use a Google kind of redirect phone number, and that will give you more information about, you know, whether the call lasted for more than 1 minute, and you can actually count that as a conversion. And that's particularly useful if your users are going to be on a mobile device and you want them to kind of call while they're out and about. So this is really designed for kind of small business advertisers, maybe a shop or a restaurant, so you can click an ad on your phone and dial a number straight away. But again, it's a way for you to kind of take up more real estate and show the sort of information that might be on your homepage or your Contact Us page, but on a Google search result. If you have a Google Plus page or a Google My Business page set up, you can also link that to your AdWords account, and that will show location extensions. So for a charity, that might be charity shops, it might be different branches across the UK. And again, that will kind of just enrich the display of your ad on the search result page. Another best practice, which I've kind of veered away from for reasons which I will explain, is using dynamic keyword insertion within your ad copy. You'll see this quite a lot for advertisers like Amazon, where they have millions of products, and they're not going to write individual ads for each of those products, so they kind of programmatically write their ads using dynamic keyword insertion. And what that does is it takes the keywords that the user's query matches with, so not necessarily exactly what the user's typing in, but the keyword that their phrase matches with, and it will insert that into the ad in positions that you specify. I recommend doing it in the headline because it's easier to control grammatically. It's much harder to insert a keyword that could be a plural or a singular within proper sentences, so I tend to do it only in the headline. The reason for using keyword insertion is that it really does improve your click-through rate, because it makes your ads look more relevant, they become in bold when it matches the query, and users are more likely to click on it. Reasons not to use it is it does create a bit of extra management burden on the account, because there will be some keywords in your account that are not appropriate to be inserted into an ad. It might be language that doesn't match your organization's ethos or brand. It might be a typo, which is it's a legitimate use of a keyword to have kind of commonly mistyped or misspelled names or place names or whatever. But it might also just be not grammatical, and it will make it just look sloppy, unprofessional if you have those errors in your ad copy. So we usually manage our accounts to have keywords in ad groups that are suitable for dynamic keyword insertion, and we kind of name those ad groups appropriately, and then clearly label ad groups with keywords that are not suitable for keyword insertion. And that just reminds us when we're writing new ads not to use keyword insertion in those particular ads. Another best practice, a lot of this stuff comes from Google's own advice, is to write your ad copy in title case. And by title case, I don't mean capitalize the first letter of every single word, because I think that looks a bit ugly and can be difficult to read. I mean kind of capitalizing all the main words, but then manually converting words like in and the and a into lowercase. This looks a bit weird to begin with, and I would prefer not to do it, but the reason I do it is it does improve performance. So Google recommend it, and their recommendation is based on billions of impressions and clicks. So it does improve click-through rate, it does help your ads stand out, it improves overall performance, so you might as well do it. If you're using AdWords Editor, you can automatically convert your ads into title case, but it does convert every single word, and it will change acronyms into capital and then 2 lowercase words, for example. So I wouldn't do it without checking it manually. I also recommend writing your site links in title case, but the one exception is the call-out ad extensions. So these are the kind of snippets of unclickable text. Google recommends doing those in lowercase, and I think it actually makes the ad easier to read because it's not the main message of your ad. So it's easier on the eye if you write those in sentence case. So just capitalize the first word and then any proper nouns. Another best practice for writing ad copy is to end the first line of your description with a punctuation mark. For me, that's usually a full stop or a colon, but it could be any punctuation mark like a comma or an exclamation mark. The reason for this is it signals to Google that your ad copy is optimized, and it means that that first line of description is more likely to be promoted up next to the headline. So you'll take up more horizontal real estate, and it helps your ad stand out against your competitors. You do have to make sure that your ad is still grammatical when you're doing this, but the way I usually approach it is to use the first line of description to describe the landing page or set an expectation for the user. And then I'll use the second line of description for my call to action. So that would be, sign up to the event, download a publication, find out more. And that structure seems to work quite well. You can play around and put the call to action in the headline or the first line of description, but do try and end that first line of description with a punctuation mark. It also signals to Google that your ads are eligible to be displayed above the search results. So Google have recently changed the layout on search results. There used to be ads on the right-hand side, but they got rid of those because no one ever clicks on them. If you actually segment your data within AdWords, you'll see that the click-through rates for those side ads were below 1% across the board. They're about 0.4%, I think, on average. And the click-through rate for ads above the search results are much better. And you're much more likely to get into those top positions if you have optimized ad copy with this punctuation mark at the end of description line 1. Another thing to think about, and this will very much depend on your organization, is whether it's suitable to target your campaign just to the UK or worldwide. And it might depend on the sort of action you're asking users to do and whether the content is relevant for a worldwide audience. So if you're a UK-based think tank dealing with UK issues, then the UK is probably your ideal target location. But if you're a global organization with a global audience, English speaking, then it's appropriate to target worldwide. One thing we sometimes do with international organizations is to create a campaign in English and then ask their team to translate that into Spanish or Chinese or Arabic or whatever. But use kind of the English campaign as the basis and then change the location and the language targeting for that particular campaign so that it is for Spanish speakers, for example. But that is one way, if you're looking for ways to grow the amount that you're spending, thinking about the location targeting could be a way to increase it. So you may want to target English speakers worldwide, and it will help you get those extra clicks that might get you up to the Grants Pro threshold. Within your campaign settings, you have a choice of how the ads are rotated. So if you're writing more than one ad per ad group, the default option is to optimize for clicks. So this would show the ad that has the highest click-through rate more often. So initially they will get an equal number of impressions, but then eventually there'll be a winner that will get more of the clicks. If you are tracking conversions, then I recommend switching that setting to optimize for conversions. So instead of the ad with the highest click-through rate, it'll be the ad with the highest conversion rate that gets more exposure. And that will again help you decide when you're optimizing your ads, which one you should delete and which one you should create a variant of. So those are all my tips for Google Ad Grants. As I said, a lot of them are in the guide. They're based on Google's recommendations and our own experience of managing accounts. So moving on to the Google Analytics side, and this is a kind of natural progression. And I found this as I was working on AdWords accounts. It was initially just on optimizing within AdWords. But as I did more reading, I wanted to kind of understand about improving the quality of traffic that I was sending. And you can't understand about the quality unless you analyze what happens after the click. And in order to do that, the best way with AdWords is to use Google's own tool, Google Analytics. You can use other third-party tools, but I don't come across many organizations that do. And the one organization that was using, I think it was Web Trends, it was just a nightmare to deal with that data. I couldn't actually log into their system myself. The data they gave me was completely unusable. And the nice thing is that Analytics and AdWords talk nicely to each other, so you might as well use them. The first thing I always look at is whether or not they have goals. So I mentioned this at the top of the talk, but I'm going to mention it again here because it's so important. You need to be tracking important website actions so that you can optimize your campaigns in order to achieve more of those actions. I find that a lot of user journeys often cross multiple domains. So there are a lot of third-party payment providers, or engaging networks is an example of a third-party kind of campaigning tool. And it means that the user is crossing multiple domains on their user journey. So they could be initially landing on, your own main root domain, but then be sent off to a third-party tool to donate or sign up to a petition. And ideally, you want to be tracking the whole of that user journey within the same analytics account. And in order to do that, you have to set up cross-domain tracking. And the principle of that is to take the session cookie that is set on the first visit, on the first page, and pass that session cookie across the domains. The session cookie is set at the domain level, so if you go from, kingsfund.org.uk to eventbrite.co.uk, that cookie is going to be dropped. And if you track both of those domains within the same account without cross-domain tracking, it will look like two sessions when really it's only one. And it will mess up your referral data. So it will look like the referrer came from kingsfund.org.uk rather than from a Google ad. So if you want to kind of prove the value of your advertising, you need to set up cross-domain tracking across all the actions that you are going to ask a user to perform. And sometimes that is a ball ache. So for Eventbrite, they don't allow you full control over your analytics code unless you really, really pester them for it. So they will install, you just take your analytics ID and they will kind of inject the code onto your page. But that analytics snippet won't be set up for cross-domain tracking. So it means that any traffic you send to Eventbrite will look like a referral, and it's a real pain. I do recommend trying to get control over the analytics implementation on all the sites you're going to use. But that isn't always possible. So PayPal, you don't always have full control. Some payment providers like WorldPay, you wouldn't be able to put your tracking code on those pages. So sometimes you have to just accept failure or incomplete data. But the principle of cross-domain tracking is to, first of all, define which domains are within your realm. So you have to specify that the cookie is going to be valid on all of those domains. And then you also have to say that you're going to accept linking between those two domains. Because the way that the session cookie is passed is in a URL parameter. So you'll sometimes see when you click on an outgoing link to another site, you'll see kind of a GA underscore and then a whole string of characters. That will be a kind of cross-domain session cookie that's being passed.
Does that include subdomains as well?
It depends on the version of Google Analytics you're using. So if you're using Universal Analytics, which is the latest version, that is already optimized for cross-domain tracking on subdomains, so that's fine. If you're using the old classic analytics that has the kind of GAC push terminology, then you have to specify the domain first. And you also have to set the domain, so you can set it to auto, which means that any domain would be accepted. But you also have to enable this allow linker plugin in the JavaScript. And a lot of that is kind of in the documentation, and it's fine, but it's much easier to do it if you're using Google Tag Manager, and I'll come to that later. So think about the user journey and make sure you've got cross-domain tracking if you need to report on the full journey, and really you should be wanting to do that. If you're going to be having multiple domains in the same Google Analytics account, I recommend starting to use filters to change the way that your data appears in analytics. And before you even think about creating filters, I recommend duplicating your main default view and creating a copy of it without any filters at all, because you want to make sure that if those filters go wrong in some way, like you might have written a regular expression incorrectly, which will mess up your data, you want to make sure you kind of have a backup option. So the best practice is make sure you always have an unfiltered view that you don't apply any filters to. If you are cross-domain tracking and you want to be able to tell the difference between kingsfund.org.uk/ as your homepage and, say, for example, eventbrite.co.uk/, you want to be able to tell the difference between the slash. So by default, it only shows you the slug in the URL. It doesn't show you the host name within Google Analytics. So in order to distinguish between domains and subdomains, you need to set up what's called a show host name filter. and that will take the host name, so like the full URL, and it will import it into your Google Analytics reports. Again, I'm not going to explain how to do this. There is a quite clear guide in the Google Analytics help pages about how to do it. But it's something I recommend kind of doing early on in the process because it does change all of the URLs within your account. So there might be a point before you set this up when the homepage just looked like /, and then after that, the homepage would look like www.domainname.org.uk. So if you do have goals that rely on URLs, you're going to have to adapt them accordingly. I also recommend creating a filter to exclude your organization's internal IP address. And that is simpler for some organizations than others. If you have a single office with a single IP address, it's quite easy. If you have lots of people working from home, that's going to be harder. But particularly if it's a big organization, you want to make sure that any of the data that you're basing your business or your organizational decision on is about your real users, not people looking at their own content, their own organization's content. So speak to your IT team, your sysadmin, find out what the IP address or the IP address range is, and then create a filter that will exclude that traffic from your Google Analytics data. Google Analytics accounts have been around for a long time, and organizations work with agencies and freelancers and third parties and consultants. And over the years, multiple users might have access to an account. And I think it's always worthwhile, every now and again, just reviewing the users which have access to your data and making sure it's up to date and current. So when someone leaves the organization, remove them from your account management settings. Another thing which is sometimes neglected is setting the time zone and currency for each view in your Google Analytics account. The default is to set it to US Pacific time, so that's 8 hours behind us. And that will, if you're going to be optimizing your AdWords campaigns based on times of day, or you're reporting on when you launched a campaign, you want the date and the time to match up with the time in your own location. So set your time zone properly and set your currency to the one you're going to be reporting in. Again, by default, it's US dollars, but you may be taking donations in British pounds. The nice thing is that if you're an international organization and you receive donations in multiple currencies, Google will convert those currencies into the default currency that you set within your e-commerce data. Another trick, which again is not set up by default, is to track your internal site search. So this is not a Google search. This is for the search box on your own site to help users navigate around. This is set in the view settings for Google Analytics, and you need to know the search parameters. So in Drupal sites, it's usually search. In WordPress sites, it's usually Q or S. And what that will do is it will take the search term that the user typed into your site search and then spit that data into Google Analytics. And it's useful to have that because it's a source of ideas when you're building campaigns, so it's keywords that users are using. It can help you inform decisions about redesigning your site architecture. So if the same search is occurring over and over again, it might suggest that you want to put that page within your main navigation, make it more visible. But it could also introduce new ideas for content. So if a search is happening but no relevant results are appearing from your internal site search, it suggests there's a demand for a particular piece of content on that keyword. So it's worth having that data. You don't have to use it all the time, but it's just a nice pool of data to have when it comes to redesigning your site or thinking about new campaigns. If you do have transactions occurring on your site, whether that's donations or an online shop, I really recommend setting up e-commerce tracking because it can help you make much more richer informed decisions about how to optimize your AdWords campaigns, how to optimize your marketing in general. If you know that a certain channel is returning a certain amount of revenue, it can help you make decisions about where you should direct your budgets. And this is not something you can do by yourself as a marketer. You often have to work with a developer or with your agency to set it up. It can be difficult, but it can give you really nice results, really rich data if you do it properly. So if if you're a membership organization and you generate revenue from subscription fees or sign-up fees, it's really nice to be able to know the different value of your marketing channels. So you know if you want to recruit more members, spend it on this particular channel because it got a much better return. I've done this recently with the World Food Programme. So they have a kind of international donation page that all their users are sent to, but they weren't tracking it at all from an e-commerce point of view. We've now used enhanced e-commerce, which is the latest version of e-commerce, which has a lot more reports, so it lets you kind of slice and dice your data in more detail. Enhanced e-commerce is also great because it allows you to track the checkout steps more accurately. Before enhanced e-commerce existed, the way you would track a kind of conversion funnel would be to set up a destination URL goal within analytics and then define what the different steps of the funnel were. But there are problems with the way that Google Analytics processes that data. Because if you come in partway through the journey, even if you didn't visit the first 2 pages, Analytics would assume that you did, and it would fill it in as if you had visited those pages. So it's kind of giving you false data in some ways. And it would also be really difficult to interpret the funnel because it would have all sorts of kind of incoming and outgoing user journeys that didn't match up with the one that you defined. The nice thing about enhanced e-commerce tracking is that you can set programmatically what step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 were in the journey, and then give those kind of human readable names within the analytics interface. So it might be select your country, select your fund you're going to donate to, specify the payment amount, choose the payment method, and then complete the donation. And you can get a much clearer picture of where users are dropping out in that conversion journey. Again, it's quite labor intensive. It's taken us about 5 days of my time plus their developers' time plus project management. So it takes time to set it up properly, but it will give them much richer information that they can use to then optimize their donation form based on data rather than based on assumptions or a blog article that someone's read. One of the innovations that they've made kind of around about the same time that Universal Analytics came out is to be smarter about identifying the different channels that are sending traffic to your site. So before the channel report existed within Analytics under the acquisition section, the main way of understanding the data was by source and medium. And that's sometimes difficult to process. And email could appear in all sorts of different buckets. But Google's got much smarter at learning what those different channels are. It's identified organic search, paid search, referral traffic, social, and email, and it's got much smarter about that. But it's still not without flaws. So the default channel grouping looks something like this, and there's usually a kind of undefined other bucket. And usually within that bracket, there will be email campaigns that aren't tagged with the medium email. They might be social campaigns that have been tagged with parameters that aren't recognized by Google as a social channel. And there might be a kind of Facebook advertising and pay-per-click advertising within paid search, even though they're not really paid search. And that's because they share a medium that's CPC or PPC. But you have the ability to redefine how Google sorts different sources and mediums into buckets. And that's by creating a copy of your default channel grouping and then redefining the rules that does the sorting. So we've done this with a number of organizations now, and it's a way for them to get kind of more granular feedback about how the different marketing channels are performing. So with this organization, we split out the kind of paid search into display ads, into job listings on other sites, into LinkedIn ads, and sticky posts on forums and so on. So it kind of gives you a much richer picture of how the different channels are organized. I recommend creating a copy of the default and editing the revised version, because that data will then be retrospective. If you make your changes to the default channel grouping, then it won't be retrospective. It will only affect data that comes into the account after that. And the nice thing is you can switch between the channel sortings. Another relatively recent innovation is this kind of channel grouping does appear in some of the conversion reports, like the multi-channel funnels and attribution model reports, which I'll talk about next. And it used to be you would have to redefine your channel groups in both places within the account. Now you just have to do it once, and the same rules that you define will be shared between the two different reports. So if you are going to be analyzing your marketing mix as a whole, I really recommend getting on top of your revised channel grouping. Multi-channel funnels. So we know that users don't just convert the first time you send them an email or they come to your site via an ad or a Facebook post. A lot of the time they have complicated journeys where they come to your site 3 or 4 times before they perform the action, the donation, whatever it is you want them to do. Multi-channel funnels kind of expose that picture. And the way it does that is Google Analytics understands users. So it will recognize people who have come to your site before, and it will treat their sessions as if it's the same person. So multi-funnel channels give you a report like this, where you can see, for example, that in these conversions, paid search, which are the blue tags, were quite a big part of it, but they weren't always the last click in the user journey. So for those first 7 results, pay-per-click was the first interaction, but it wasn't necessarily always the last one. There were some direct visits. In the third one, there were like a paid ad click, and then an organic search, and then the conversion occurred. And usually, the model for describing conversions is a last click model. So it's the last click before conversion that gets the credit. But you'll see from this picture that it's more complicated than that. And we need to be a bit more sophisticated about how we attribute the conversions that have occurred in our accounts. If you were just losing last click, you would kind of undervalue the importance of organic search. So you can see from rows 8 to 13, organic search was actually the first interaction a user had, and then they came back having clicked on an ad or from direct visits. And you'd be kind of undervaluing the importance of organic search if you just used last click attribution, which is the standard model in all of the analytics reports. The nice thing about multi-channel funnels is you occasionally get these weird anomalies. So this, what I'm showing here, is apparently one user before they converted. So they came direct 4 times, organic search direct 3 more times, 3 organic searches, a referral. They clicked on an ad somewhere in that mix. To me, that doesn't look like a single person. That looks like a shared computer, maybe at work or in a university, where the browser cookies haven't been reset every time. But that could be a super, super engaged person. It could also be someone internally testing and visiting the site every day. But that shows you some user journeys can be incredibly complex. And would it be fair to attribute that conversion just to the final referral? And that means you'd kind of completely discredit all the other touch points that occurred along the way. So this is kind of starting to get to a more nuanced picture of how conversions occur. So that's the multi-channel funnels, and that gives you an idea of the different touch points. But if you're going to be kind of reporting on which channels gave you conversions, I recommend having a look at attribution models. And this is way down at the bottom of the conversion report in analytics. And it can be difficult to get your head around initially. But an attribution model is basically just changing where you give the credit to the conversion. So as I said, the standard model is last click. You could also do first click if you think the acquisition is really important. You can also have a linear conversion model where you give credit, equal credit to each touch point along the journey. So if you have 10 different touch points, they all get 10% of the credit for the conversion. You can also have like a time decay where the first click gets most of the credit and then it decays the longer the journey goes on. But it's going to be different for every organization. I think the model that I've settled on as being sort of useful is to give more credit to the first and the last clicks and less to the clicks in the middle. So first click's important because you're kind of engaging that user or that device for the first time. The last click's important because that's the session that leads to the conversion. And then the middle ones are important because they're keeping that user engaged or presenting them with content that they're reading at least, but it's not actually leading to the action that you want to get more of. So I would typically give something like 40% of the credit to the first click, 50% of the credit to the last click, and then the middle clicks would get 10%. And you can also give extra weighting to middle clicks that have deep engagement. So if they have multiple page views, you could give them, an extra 10% credit. So at the end of that, you get a kind of report which looks like a little bit of nonsense. So you might have like 10.34 conversions, but that might be, PDF downloads or event signups. You can't have 0.34 of an event signup, but it gives you a more proportional picture of the different values of your marketing channels. So I recommend having a look at that and thinking how it applies to your organization, whether, getting the people in the door in the first place is more important or whether the action at the end is the thing you want to weight. And that will help you make a case for things like social media. So there was Matt Collins' infamous article in The Guardian a few weeks ago saying that social media was useless and rubbish. And that's partly because we usually base those reports on last click attribution. Whereas if you used an attribution model that gave value to those middle clicks that don't lead to conversion, that might be a way for you to make a business case within your organization for, investing more time and energy in your social channels. Another way to get more reliable data, and this feeds into the channel report that I mentioned earlier, is whenever you are placing a link to your content on another website or social network, I recommend tagging your link with campaign parameters. So this was the tool that was designed to help AdWords data appear within Google Analytics, appear in Google Analytics before the auto tagging. So it allows you to specify the campaign, the source, and the medium. Those are the 3 required fields. But you can also specify the keyword and the content. So it could be the ad content. And the way I recommend using it is always to use lowercase, not to use spaces, because they kind of mess up your URLs. They'll, instead of a space, it'll be encoded as %20. And use hyphens instead of spaces, so it's a bit more readable. I recommend being consistent about the campaign names you give. So if you have a Guide Dogs campaign about preventing parking on pavements, tag all of those links for that campaign with the same kind of keywords so that you can report on the activity for that one campaign. Use the source to kind of identify where the traffic is coming from. So is it Facebook? Is it a newsletter? Is it a certain segment of your audience that you're targeting? So if you have email segmentation, kind of put the name of that segment into the source. And then you use the medium to describe whether it's email, whether it's CPC, whether it's social, or whether it's a referral on another site. And it's worth writing kind of in-house guidelines. If you've got multiple marketers working on different campaigns, write a set of guidelines that helps them be consistent about how they tag their links. And one of the tools that you can use in order to be more consistent is to use a thing called the Epic One link tagging tool. So this is a Google Docs spreadsheet that's been configured with a formula that will generate the tagged URL, and all you have to do is fill in cells within a table, and it will kind of complete the URL for you with the tags. It means you don't have to use the URL builder within Google Analytics help pages. And the good thing is you can share this document so that other people can see how you've tagged the same campaign before and just be more consistent about how you do it. You may want to use a link shortener like bit.ly if you're going to be adding these links to social media to make your links look more palatable, but also so you can see when someone's actually clicked on the link. If you add a plus to the end of a bit.ly link, you can get richer information about where the click occurred and at what time. So you can kind of tag your links first, then shorten them with bit.ly, and then post them on your social channels. This is a bit of kind of housekeeping, but sometimes the account and the properties and the views within that account aren't always named clearly. So I get a little bit frustrated when it's a whole organization's account and they give the whole account the name of the URL of the main website, but within that account they're actually tracking multiple different domains. So I'm kind of quite anal about this sort of stuff, and I just like making sure that things are describing exactly what you're looking at. So name your account after the organization, name the properties after the websites that are going to be in that property. So it could be, your main website and then a donation page, or it could be a microsite that you want to track separately. It could be a completely separate campaign site. And then name your views explicitly, so make sure you describe which domains are within that view. Is it your default view that you should do all your reporting from? Is it a separate view that you've filtered just to look at traffic in the UK or just to look at traffic coming from a certain page? Just be consistent about that and be clear so that if someone later down the line after you've left the organization comes along, they can kind of understand what data it is they're looking at. And a really important one for that is make sure you own your data. If you work with an agency, some agencies actually set up your analytics data within their own account. And that means that you don't have full ownership of it, you don't have full admin permission, you can't actually set up new properties, so they might not have given you the right level of permissions. So if you are starting from scratch, set up a brand new account with your own organizational email address rather than relying on an agency. Like, take ownership of your data. There have been too many times when I've been working with an organization and they don't actually have full control. They can't give me permissions, and it's just, I can't really help them if I can't set up goals and configure their account for them. And it means that someone else could delete your data as well. They've got that control over it. Use the Universal Analytics tracking snippet. So this is the latest version of Google Analytics. It's better because it gives you richer reports. There are some features that are only available in Universal Analytics, but it is also much better at the cross-domain tracking, so it does the subdomain tracking by default. So you should be using Universal Analytics by now. And the easiest way to implement that is to use Google Tag Manager. So I don't have time to go into much detail about this, but it's my recommended way of implementing Google Analytics in this day and age. The beauty of it is that it gives you more control over your analytics implementation. So the theory behind it is you install one snippet of code at the top of the body of your website, which is a different position from where the snippet has traditionally been placed. So make sure you brief your developers properly. You install one snippet of code, and then you are able to inject different bits of JavaScript or analytics tags within that from a web interface. You don't have to change the source code after you've installed that initial container snippet. The nice thing is it gives you more flexibility about tracking custom goals. So a lot of websites don't track PDF downloads or file downloads by default. If you are using Drupal, the Google Analytics module in Drupal is quite good. It does track outbound link clicks, it tracks file downloads by default. But you can also do that stuff via Tag Manager if you're not using Drupal. Sometimes we have a hybrid approach for Drupal sites where we use the Drupal Analytics module for the basic page view tracking, but then we do the custom tracking via Google Tag Manager. But if you're going to be starting from scratch, just use Tag Manager on its own. One thing I recommend doing within your analytics account is to add annotations to your reports. So if there's a campaign launching on a particular date, add an annotation for that date so that you can look back on it in 6 months' time and understand why there's a spike in traffic or why the behavior of the users on the site changed on that particular date. I'd also recommend annotating things like when you launched a new AdWords campaign, when you changed a particular setting in your analytics account, so you might apply a new filter. Make sure you specify that in your annotations. And I've actually had a really smart request from one of my clients about how can we automatically send our code commits as annotations into analytics. I haven't come up with an answer for that yet, but I'm sure you could do it with some kind of Puppet tool. But it'd be nice to know, like, a certain change, like we changed the homepage design on this date, this was the code commit. So if you are troubleshooting issues, you can then look back at the code commit reference and figure out why that change in behavior occurred. In analytics, I also recommend creating custom dashboards and reports for specific audiences. So a lot of people find Google Analytics overwhelming. It has dozens of reports, and sometimes it's difficult to get the information you want in a simple, uncluttered view. And the data you might want to show your CEO is going to be different from your social media team. It's going to be different for your campaign and your fundraising teams. So if you're in charge of the setup, I would encourage you to create custom dashboards and reports to present data to your various different audiences. You can create them within a single report, so you might have multiple tabs for the different levels of your organization, so everyone can see all the data if they want to, but then they'll know which one's specifically aimed for them. And you can send these reports and dashboards automatically by email, so they can receive a PDF every Monday morning, giving them an overview of the last 7 days, if that's what they want. You can also set up alerts to notify you when your conversion rate drops below a certain threshold or your traffic spikes. These aren't always massively reliable. Sometimes they fail to fire, and sometimes they can be white noise if you set the threshold at the wrong level. But it's one of those ways where you can kind of catch problems before it's too late. Sometimes you might not look at your analytics account for a couple of weeks, and therefore you might not spot that your donation tracking is broken. So if you're setting up alerts for those kind of critical actions, you can kind of get on top of the problems earlier. That's it.